Welcome to another edition of Who's Better Baseball, the podcast where we answer a simple question on each show. Who's better at baseball? I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein, managing editor at justbaseball.com. I have Elijah Evans with me today, and it's about who's going to get better at the deadline this year. And really, I just wrote an article that will be going up later today. Who will take advantage of a seller's market at the trade deadline? And the entire genesis of the article is this is a year where there are teams that had World Series aspirations who have fallen out of the mix. There's teams that we didn't even expect to contend this year that are right in the thick of it, which is creating a seller's market. And there are teams that could sell their pieces for 125 cents on the dollar and really get a big return. So, first of all, before we get into the specific teams, is that how you see it as well? That this is a clear seller's market? And if you're even kind of trying to decide, maybe it makes more sense that this is a year where you say, you know what, there's too much competition. It's going to be hard to win a World Series. Let's just pull back and take advantage of the opportunity in front of us as a ball club.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think it is a seller's market right now. And I think it's more than ever a time where teams have to look at themselves and say, are we legitimately contending right now? Because it's not, there's a difference between contending and, pushing for maybe a wild card spot, right? And there's just that you have to be realistic with yourself right now. And as you said, there's a few teams that we didn't expect to be in the playoff hunt that look like clear playoff teams. Teams like Texas that were, up and coming. And we were like, they're going to be good this year. But we were thinking, I think the consensus was, Texas would be pushing for a wild card and they're going to be battling Houston for the division for probably till the end of the season right now, the way it's looking. So there's a lot of teams that are on this edge in this middle tier of the league where you're not a clear rebuilder who just, you sell a few pieces, you move on with your life and you just rebuild the rest of the year, but are teams that aren't going to be competing. And even if they, get close and can push for a wild card spot, if that's your highest outcome for some of those teams, you have to seriously look at just moving some pieces and resetting and planning for next year.
It's, we saw a team like the Cardinals already come out and say they're going to do it. And I feel like we're going to see more and more of that over the next couple of weeks here. And, we're 2 weeks away from the deadline. In this article, I just straight up eliminated any team that was within a game of the playoffs heading into the second half. But there's two teams that had a caveat on that I want to discuss before we get into the main sellers. The first is the Cleveland Guardians. Now, at the time of originally writing the article, they were sitting at 500. They're in first place in the division. They got swept over the weekend, and now it's the Twins that are in first place in your AL Central, where it could be a different team any week. I think they're one where it's a just trade Shane Bieber, but then hold everything else because you can still win this division. I think, is that where we're at with the Guardians?
I mean, now they're not going to trade Bieber. Bieber went on the IL yesterday with
I
a
did.
forearm strain. So Bieber's having some issues with his arm. So not only is he not going to be wanted necessarily, but you're not going to see a guy like that get traded while dealing with an injury. So realistically, the Guardians are a stand pat, maybe add a piece or two. I think they know they can beat the Twins. That's what's interesting about the situation is as rough as the Guardians have played at points this season, as much as they just got swept and they're not even in first anymore. And they've been right around or below 500 most of the year, but I think they know if they get going and things start to click for them a little bit more and certain guys on their team start to produce a little bit, they can still win this division pretty easily, I think. So I think for both the Twins and the Guardians, the Twins are more of an obvious, like they're going to try and buy and try and win the division. The Guardians, I think, are confident in a lot of their young talent to the point where they are going to try to win the division. And it doesn't hurt them if they don't necessarily. A lot of their team is controllable. They have many years of control on a lot of the guys in their roster. Their core, at least, is pretty intact right now. Their pitching rotation is pretty stable aside from the question of Bieber long term. So they're a team that I think, they may look to add a bat. I think they would be good if they added a bat. I don't know. Obviously, they're not a team that spends huge, but I think, as you said, they're going to stay pretty much where they are. Maybe add one piece or two, but they're just going to try to win the division. The Cleveland way, which is with their homegrown talent.
Yeah, and so that brings me to my second team that I had the caveat on, and that was the Milwaukee Brewers, who just took the division back from the Reds. The only reason why I put them on as a caveat is because you never really know with the Brewers, but at this point, considering how weak their division is and the fact that they really are battling an upstart, does it make any sense for them to sell? Like, is there any chance that we're shocked on the deadline and they actually move some of these pieces?
I mean, I wouldn't be shocked because it's the Brewers. Do I think it would be a good idea and make sense at all? Not really. I mean, the Reds are good, and I get that. The Reds are one of the hottest teams in baseball over the last few months, and they have a really young and talented roster. The Brewers' pitching rotation is still miles ahead of the Reds. So ultimately, come down to the stretch of the season. If the Brewers' pitching rotation, if their big time arms can really stay consistent, Corbin Burns looked amazing this weekend. If their big guys in the rotation can really step up and look consistently good, I think they still have a better chance to win the division than the Reds do, just simply based on their experience. They've been there. The Reds you're starting to see a little bit of streakiness with some of these young players in the Reds, which is bound to happen at some point, as amazing as they have been. I think it's tricky, but I do think the Brewers they just need to try to win the division at least. I mean, again, it's hard to look at either the AL or NL Central and say, any of these teams have a legitimate shot in the playoffs, because I don't believe they do. So it's a tricky spot to be in when you're trying to win a division, but you don't really stack up against some of the teams in the East and the West for the Brewers. So I think they have to try and be buyers, or at least be holders. I don't think they're going to sell. I mean, yeah, they could sell Devin Williams and like do what they did last year, which would just be kind of ridiculous. But I mean, maybe. You never know. That's just what I say with the Brewers is you never know. I don't think they should sell, but would it shock me? No.
Yeah, that's where I was at too. And the
Yeah.
last couple from this section of who's not selling, I have two teams that I think are squarely in the Shohei Ohtani mix next year, who I think want to win this year to make themselves look like a winning franchise and a prime destination. It's the Giants, who have been good this year, and I think they are really a case of probably should buy or at least stand pat. And then it's the Mariners, who are playing a little bit better lately. And I feel like they're a team that doesn't really have enough to sell, even if they decided to, where they're so all in on this team that I feel like they're going to stay in the mix. The Giants, if they wanted to, like, they could certainly go into the mix of the teams we're about to discuss that could kind of turn this market on its head and actually get a lot. I just don't see it in the cards for either of those teams to sell.
Yeah, I don't think it'll happen. I mean, there's a world where I could see it, right? I mean, who knows exactly what happens if the Mariners were to, lose 7 straight in the next week. I could see it, but like you said, there's not a ton of pieces there. The Giants, are good for no apparent reason, really. I don't exactly understand why the Giants are good, but they are. It still confuses me when I watch them play. But they have been good, and the Mariners just been a little bit below what we expect them to be all season. I think, they've just underperformed, especially the lineup there. But I think that they have the ability to turn it around. And I think that they are planning for being a really competitive team over the next few years. They've built this core. They know what they're trying to do. Like you said, they want to be in the Shohei sweepstakes. So, I mean, I think both these teams are going to try to win. I don't know if either of them ends up making the playoffs, just simply because of how deep the wild card races are. But I think they're both teams that want to win and are going to find a way to add a little, or to stay, to hold a little. I mean, whatever it might look like. I think both these teams are heading the direction of being, holders, buyers. I don't see either of them selling in any world, really.
Yeah, I agree. And with that, we just mentioned Otani's name. So let's get into the teams that should but won't sell. And that's where I have the Angels right now. And it could go the other way quick, because it already seems to be trending in that direction. We finally found the first little report that opens the door for the Angels to, be moving on, where it's they're in listening mode on Shohei Ohtani offers. And you're 6 games out of the wild card. That could easily be 10 in 2 weeks. Without Mike Trout, the way this team's trending, I mean, they did play a really good team out of the break in the Astros, but this is getting into that territory where we all sort of envisioned before the season, where it was like, is this going to be the year where they're out of the mix again? They trade Ohtani. Well, despite the aggressive approach that we've discussed on this show before, the fact that there have been aggressive promotion, aggressive making trades, at what point do you have to just say, look, there's a slim chance that we're going to sign him in free agency? I don't know how much they believe that they will or not,
Right.
but you have a chance for the greatest rental in sports history.
Yep.
Without a doubt, the greatest
Yep.
rental in sports history. I'm going to do a whole show on this later this week, but if you could net 4 prospects as opposed to 1 comp pick, is it responsible not to sell?
It's not. I mean, it's hard to say, because again, who wants to trade Shohei Ohtani? It's not just from a baseball standpoint, from a marketing standpoint, from an international baseball standpoint. I mean, nobody wants to trade this guy. The optics of trading him look terrible. You're moving on from the best player that we have probably ever seen on a baseball field, right? So that sounds terrible. No general manager, no owner wants to make that decision. But at the end of the day, you have to think about your future and you have to think about the core that the Angels have built here. And if you are not confident you're re-signing him, you have to think about it and you have to consider it. They're not competing this year. They don't look that good right now. The pitching rotation has been below what we expected from it. No Trout in the lineup is a killer for their lineup right now. They're calling up guys way early, left and right now, just to try and make it work. Their entire draft strategy this year was drafting league ready type players, college players who could, help them sooner than later. And I get it. I get you're trying to win now. You're doing everything you can to keep this guy in town. But like you said, the package you could get for a Shohei Ohtani, even as a 3-month rental, is insane. And any team that's seriously trying to win the World Series becomes the favorite with Shohei Ohtani. I mean, seriously, if you think about the teams that could possibly trade for him, if they were to add an ace pitcher and the best DH in baseball, they instantly become the favorite probably for many teams that would look to try and trade for him. So you really have to think about it. And I just part of me just doesn't see the Angels going through with it. I don't know if I can just see them really doing it. But if they were to do it, you're looking at a completely replenished farm system for a team that, has a fairly weak one right now.
And that's why I had him in the teams that should but won't sell. And look, we were mentioning before the show, if you were to trade for the top starter on the market, even as a rental, you're getting probably 2 top 100 guys. If you were to trade for the top bat in the market, even as a rental, you'll probably get at least 2 top 100 guys. You get them in the same player, you might get 5 top tier prospects. Right. You could probably call up any of these contenders and say, I want your 5 best prospects. And it's not crazy to ask for that. So, and also even further, you could trade Brandon Drury and you could make some other moves if you wanted to. So I think they could kind of rebuild overnight with Mike Trout still being obviously the franchise guy. But you're right. I think that they still are probably of the belief that keeping Ohtani is the most important thing. And if they are willing to give him $600 million, maybe it does make sense to hold him. And guess what? If he resigns there, they were right. But let's get to the other teams here that should but won't sell. The Padres are one that I have been discussing a lot lately. And it's the fact that you could have the best starter on the market without Ohtani, obviously, with Blake Snell, the way he's pitching lately, the best closer in Josh Hader, and the best bat in Juan Soto. And even if you don't want to trade Juan Soto, because it's a year after, trading the haul you already did to get him, they could flip Snell, they could flip Hader, they could flip Michael Wacha, they could flip Seth Lugo, they could trade Hae-Sung Kim. They could get a ton back at this deadline, but I think they're going to be too close to this race to actually do it.
Yeah, this is the only one where I don't 100% agree. And this is maybe just me having a delusion a little bit of that this team is better than they are considering how they've played this year. But I honestly think this team ends up buying. I have a gut feeling that this team is just too far deep in this group of players to give up on it. And with the Padres, it's been a really weird season for them, but it's not like the talent's not there. Some of these other teams, you look at the roster and you say, this team could not compete. Is there a world where the Padres sneak into the wild card and they make serious noise like they did last year? Yeah. Because I think there is. As bad as they've been most of this year, if you give me Blake Snell, Joe Musgrove, and Yu Darvish in a playoff series with Juan Soto and Tatis and Machado and Xander, I'm still that team can win. And it sounds crazy to say those names out loud and then look at where they are this season. It doesn't make any sense, but I don't count them out. I know that might be an unpopular opinion. And I know Padres fans are completely done. Our guy Javier at Just Baseball is so done with the team. And I get it. It makes sense, but I don't know if I'm done with this team. And if, like you said, if they were to sell, I understand selling guys that are expiring, like a Hader, like a Wacha. I mean, even a Snell potentially, if you don't think you can re-sign him, they've already extended Darvish and Musgrove, so it might be a bit tricky to extend Snell there. I'm fine with that. I'm not trading Juan Soto. I know it's hard, and I know you're going to have to dish out another huge contract, but the Padres haven't been afraid to dish out huge contracts, and their roster is still very talented. And I think it's really just about retooling and figuring out how to build a roster around these core guys, because the biggest thing we've seen this year is they don't have depth. I mean, the bottom half of their lineup has been atrocious most of the season, and they've had issues with the bullpen. They've just generally had holes they just need to figure out how to fill this offseason, and whether it's the deadline or the offseason, I still think their goal is to compete soon. They are not rebuilding this team. They're way too far in to fully flip the switch and rebuild this team. So as much as they might want to sell a few pieces, I could honestly see them flipping it and being buyers if they get a few good games in. If they have a nice 2 weeks right now, they've been playing a little bit better as of late. If they can have a nice week or two right now and gain a few more games in the wild card race, I could see them even buying a few pieces here.
I think that's the best argument I've heard as far as why they shouldn't sell is just the fact that, yeah, if they get in the dance, absolutely they can make noise. But I would also take that last part that you mentioned there about the lack of depth and say that's exactly why they should sell, because
Right.
you make those trades now, and guess what? Your window around Bogarts, Machado, Tatis, well, suddenly it's a lot more sustainable. And that's why I'd even sell
Sure.
Juan Soto, although I get the idea of not doing it. I just think he's going to hit free agency, and I just wonder how many $300 million contracts you can have on the books for one team. But
Yeah. Very
we'll
true.
see. We'll see.
Yeah.
It's 2 weeks, and I think they, more than any team, what they do, and they either, if they completely fall out of it, they become the most interesting seller at the deadline. And
Yeah.
if they're even close to the mix, you're right. It might even be crazy enough to
I
buy.
mean, yeah, today they're 8 games back of the wild card, which is not good, right? But if they bring that to 3 or 4 by late July, you're telling me they're not going to try for 3 or 4 games of a difference. I mean, this team has shown to be aggressive in the past, so we'll see what happens. But especially the way Miami and Arizona are both hot teams that started really good and are both looking not great lately. So I think there's a world where they are in contention for the playoffs and they really make a push. We'll see.
Well, we will see. Moving over to another team in this list of teams that should but won't sell, the Boston Red Sox. They're in the mix. They're 2 games out, but they're in a really tough division. I think the question really is what you have to sell really worth not just saying, let's give our fans a fun season? Because while Justin Turner's been great this year, 125 WRC plus, 13 home runs, you could trade Adam Duvall, you could trade Kiki Hernandez, you could trade Kenley Jansen, Chris Martin. There are pieces that could be moved. James Paxton even's had a pretty nice year. Are any of them going to get a return that's worth it? Or are they even at a point where it's like any return is worth it because you're not making noise with this team anyway?
Yeah, that's the tricky spot with Boston. I don't think they're competing, but like you said, is there anybody on that roster who's getting you a big return? I mean, not really. Of the guys you're trading, at least, like you mentioned, none of those guys are getting you a huge return. You're probably looking at one decent prospect for most of those, for Turner, for Jansen, for a few of those other guys. So, I would sell if I was them, just simply because you have a few guys that are at the very ends of their career that aren't going to help you long term. And the Red Sox core is looking pretty good going forward. I mean, they've developed a pretty solid core. But if you look at the AL wildcard race, I mean, seriously, man, this race is insane. You factor Texas and Houston, one of them is winning the division, the other one's going to be a wildcard team. They're both just too good of teams to not make it. I see no way that both those teams aren't in the playoffs, right? So then you got two wildcard spots. Baltimore has suddenly caught up on Tampa Bay in that division, which is insane. They're only 2 games back right now, which is crazy. But again, one of those teams is winning the division. One of those teams is getting the wild card. I don't see a world where both those teams are not in the playoffs. You got one spot left. You got Toronto, who looks better than they have all season right now. They're on a 4-game winning streak coming out of the break. You've got New York, who the Yankees are going to buy. That's just, come on, it's the Yankees. And then you've got Seattle, who, like we talked about, they're going to try. They're going to try and make it happen. And I don't think they're that much worse than the Red Sox. I mean, they're 3 games behind the Red Sox, but I think they're definitely on par with the Red Sox. So those are 3 teams that are all really good that I think probably have a better shot than the Red Sox making the playoffs for one spot, right? Those are all those teams I mentioned. It's for one spot, most likely. So it is a really tight race, and I don't see any world where Boston has a chance, really. So maybe you just try and you stay pat, or you add one piece and you call it a day and you just let it ride out. But I think they'd be smart to at least sell off a few of those aging veterans.
Yeah, no, and honestly, to me, that kind of bridges perfectly into the Mets, because they are one of the 4, sellers I write about here. But as someone that covers this team every day on Locked On Mets, I'm looking at what they have to sell, and you could say, yeah, sell everything you want to, right? There's not a lot to sell. I don't know what Tommy Pham gets you. I don't know what Mark Canha gets you. Both of those guys essentially rentals. I mean, Canha has an option, but it's an option that most teams probably wouldn't want to pick up. Um, you could sell David Robertson, but David Robertson was pitching great last year, and he netted one prospect back to the Cubs, and it was the 26th ranked prospect in the Philly system at the time. So those are like the main pieces to sell. The only one that could potentially be interesting is Max Scherzer. Here's the thing. Max Scherzer has a player option for $43 million next year that I would be shocked that he turned down. So even if Steve Cohen eats all the contract this year, if you're another team staring at that option, how are you viewing it? So the Mets are a team that should sell. They should eat Scherzer's contract. They should eat all of these contracts. They should get any prospects they can back. But I don't see the piece that nets them a haul similar to the other three teams that we're going to talk about here. I think the other teams have better pieces to sell.
I think generally you're right. Hear me out on this one. I just finished writing the Texas Rangers off deadline guide for Just Baseball, which you guys can check out online. It's live now, but I kind of like the Rangers for Scherzer. I think they're the team that would be willing to spend that money next year, even though it's a ton of money. They have shown no hesitancy to spend right now. They are in full win now mode. They're missing Jacob deGrom for the rest of the season. So take another Mets ace and shove him in your rotation, and look at that rotation. If you put Max Scherzer in there, with the Evaldi and Gray and Martin Perez and a few of the other guys that have been pretty solid for them, I think that's a really interesting one to keep an eye on. Honestly, that's my only that when thinking about the Mets. That's the thing where I'm like you said. I mean, Scherzer, if Cohen eats a ton of the money, Scherzer can get you some prospects. I know that option is scary, and he's old and he hasn't been quite his full self this year, but teams that are competing want Max Scherzer in a playoff rotation. I mean, that's just plain and simple. Like, he's a Hall of Famer. I know there's complications, but if you can find a way to get Scherzer with minimal money attached to him, you're going to do it. So I think that's interesting. But like you said, there's not a ton. I think it's interesting because right now you look at the Mets and they're half game behind where the Padres are. So like I just said with the Padres, if the Padres have a good few weeks and they could buy, did the Mets do that? I mean, I know it feels like such a lost season. I know you watch the Mets every day and it feels like a lost season. But again, right now the NL wild card is really different in my opinion than the AL wild card. And this is something I might write an article on this at some point and break it down, because I'm not scared of the NL wild card teams. Like, are you? I mean, I'm not. If I'm a team chasing right now and I'm looking at San Francisco, Miami, and Arizona, the way they're playing, the talent on their roster, are those teams I'm seriously scared of? Because for me, it's a no. In comparison to Baltimore, Texas, Tampa, whoever that is, Houston, New York, Toronto, whatever that is, I'm nowhere near as scared of the NL wildcard teams. So for teams like the Padres and the Mets, who as bad as they've been, I don't know. I agree you're a seller, but like you said, what are you really getting in those deals? I mean, I guess you look at an Eduardo Escobar deal and you think of that as the framework kind of, you say you eat Tommy Pham's been good this year, right? You eat his entire contract, you get one or two prospects back probably. That's fine. I'm okay with that, right? Does that change the trajectory of the Mets? Not really, but I guess that's fine. David Robertson, Canha, Pham, maybe Scherzer, if you can find a team that'll be okay with the option. You sell those guys, you get whatever prospect you can, you retool in the offseason, you head into next year with the same general core. I'm okay with that. But I don't know. I've seen crazier things than the Mets ending up being buyers if they have a hot week or two. We'll see.
I think if the Mets are buyers this year, they are quite literally buyers, where they're going to make more trades like the one that they did with the Mariners to get Trevor Gott, where they're going to eat a bad contract. I mean, they might even eat a bad contract with years on it to get some pieces back, but I don't think they're trading prospect capital this year.
Probably not.
And I don't know. I don't know if I could see them basically trade. They trade Pham. They buy a reliever. They go 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. They call up Ronnie Mauricio to go youth, and they kind of try to win it. I'd be pretty surprised if they traded Max Scherzer is where I'm at. Even though I think that they if they could get something, they probably should. But I also think that the Mets want to win next year, and I honestly think that they probably value Scherzer next year at that $43 million more than any other team does. And that's why I think they probably hold. So we'll see. We'll see what happens with the Mets. All right, we got 3 more teams here 2 in the NL Central, and we have your White Sox. So let's just start with your White Sox, and we'll finish off with the other 2 big sellers.
Yeah.
What do the White Sox had to sell? What are they doing here?
Everything goes. I know that's
Everything
dramatic.
but Robert.
Everything but Robert, and maybe Cease. I think that's the question mark, really. So I'll break it down by position. You look at the rotation. The White Sox have you got to trade these guys, right? I mean, Giolito is putting together a season on par with his, best. He looks really good this year. Like all of his numbers, his watching him pitch, like he's been as good as his peak self from a few years ago. Last year he dipped down a lot in production. And even though he's a rental, he's one of the best pitchers in the market, even as a 3-month rental. The way he's pitched this year, I know you have to look at last year and you can be concerned a little bit, but looking purely at this year, Giolito is one of the best pitchers available right now. You have to trade him. You got to get what you can get. I know they've talked a little bit of extension talk. Maybe I think there's a possibility the White Sox would extend him, but given that he's a free agent at the end of the year, given the direction of this team right now, you got to trade Giolito. There's a lot of teams that are going to want him. Yes, you're not getting a top prospect for a rental guy like him, but the Sox could get a package of 2 quality prospects for Giolito, maybe 3 even, two prospects and a throw-in type thing. So I expect Giolito to be traded. Lance Lynn, same deal. He has a team option, or I believe he has a team option next year that could get declined. A team would have the ability to go either direction with it. But Lynn he's been better of late. He's had a rough season overall, but his last 3 or 4 starts, he's actually looked really solid. So I think as a veteran guy who's been around for a while, I think that he's making a push to get traded and to get a prospect back for the White Sox. It's not going to be a crazy return, but the White Sox would be crazy not to trade him. He's old. He's past the peak of his career, but he's still been pretty solid lately. He's looked a lot better. He's getting a lot of swing and miss lately, which is impressive for a guy, who works primarily 3 different types of fastballs. So I think you trade him to a contender, somebody plugs him into their 5 spot in the rotation, and that's a done deal, done with. The big piece of the rotation to consider is Dylan Cease, obviously. Cease is having a down year by his standards, but last night yesterday he put up a 1-run start against the Braves, which is the best lineup in baseball. So his last few starts, he's had some moments where he really looks like himself. His sliders, it ticked up a little bit. His early in the season, his slider had some issues and it wasn't quite inducing as much break as it did last year. His slider was the best pitch in all of baseball last year by all standard metrics. So he was great, and he still has shown the ability to be great this year. And even with a down year, he has 2 more years of control. He's in the prime. He's entering the prime of his career. That's a piece where that's a haul, right? That is not like Giolito will get prospects to the Sox, but trading Dylan Cease with 2 full more years of arbitration after this, that's a haul. That's the deal with the White Sox where that is blowing it up almost. I don't think the White Sox 100% blow it up. There's no world where you completely blow it up with this current roster and the way that they've set up this organization. But if you're looking to really reboot the farm system, you got to consider trading Dylan Cease and taking advantage of, like we said, the whole point of this, taking advantage of a seller's market. You have to consider trading Cease. And that's the deal where, like, if you're a team like the Rangers, if you're a team like the Orioles, if you're a team like the Dodgers, those are the 3 teams that I've been mentioning. I've been talking with Arm Layton a lot lately about a possible Cease trade. And those are the 3 teams that we keep coming back to as contenders with a lot of extra prospect capital to give up in a situation where they would be comfortable looking to extend Cease sooner than later, given that if he really kind of gets going, he has a good second half of the season, he looks like himself again more, which he's already started to lately. You have the money and the ability to extend him, and you have the excess prospects to give up. So before I get to the hitters, I want to hear your take on the Cease idea.
Yeah, I think Cease, now that I know of the Shane Bieber injury that I wasn't aware of prior to recording today, that just opens the door even more, because starters with control, not a lot in the market. There's a lot of guys that, we'll talk about a couple in the next 2 teams here, that are essentially rentals. Cease is the guy that some of these teams can look at, like last year's Luis Castillo, and they can say, all right, we'll get him, we'll keep him, and hey, we might even extend him. That's worth trading our farm for. So yeah, if I'm the White Sox, and I've had the last couple of years that I've had where you were trying to win and it hasn't worked out for you, I would want to hit that reset button a little bit. And there's not a better piece to reset with right now than getting what you can for Cease.
Yeah, and I think that was a great comparison by you. And look at how it's turning out for the Reds right now. I know that it hasn't come through yet, but a Noelvi Marte and an Edwin Arroyo as the 2 headliners of that deal for Luis Castillo. If the White Sox can net 2 prospects of those caliber and you add in 1 or 2 guys, it's you have to consider it. Like you said, the market is so thin right now, and Cease has enough talent even on a down year for teams to really take a swing at him with 2 more years of control. So you got to consider it. Switching gears a little, the White Sox bullpen, every single person in the bullpen should be available. I mean, what are you holding bullpen arms for in a team that's, whether you're retooling or rebuilding, whatever you want to call it. The White Sox have a bunch of middle of their career, late in their career relievers. Kendall Graveman's been great this year. He's been the primary closer for the White Sox with Liam Hendricks out most of the season. He's been great. He has a pretty decently affordable contract for next year. I think you can net a pretty solid return for Graveman. That's the biggest piece, I would say. Beyond that, Joe Kelly has been okay this year. He's a little expensive, but if the Sox eat some money, they could get a prospect for Kelly. He's a veteran. He's been around. Kenyon Middleton, Ronaldo Lopez, both affordable bullpen arms. Middleton's been great this year. Lopez has been a little worse this year, but was great last year and has shown the ability to be a solid reliever. So you're getting what you can get for any of the relievers, in my opinion. There's no real reason to hold on to many of those pen guys at all. Maybe Lopez, just because he's the youngest of the bunch and was a prospect for the Sox at one point. But I think you're trading bullpen guys, and then you look on the offensive side of the ball, and there's not a lot to trade there, unfortunately. The Sox are in a position where a lot of guys are at the low of their value, so it's really hard to say you can trade this guy. I mean, I'm going to have my deadline breakdown for the Sox coming soon. The Tim Anderson case is really tough. Tim Anderson doesn't look like he wants to be in Chicago right now. He's been pretty checked out most of the season. He's not playing very well. I mean, in terms of pure baseball, he's been one of the worst players on the White Sox, actually, which is really hard to even say that out loud, given how much I've loved him and everybody's loved him for many years. And he's been the face of the franchise for a while, but he's been pretty terrible most of the season. What are you doing? You're trading a guy who was your best hitter by all means for 3-4 years for 10 cents on the, I mean, it's tough. I think you can look into trading him, and because he has another year of control that's pretty affordable next year, I think there's some teams that would give you something, but at this point, the way he's playing, I'd rather just hold and look at it in the offseason or next year, because just you're getting so little value for a guy who would have been valued really highly a year ago, 2 years ago. So it's tough. I mean, if the right deal comes around, I'm fine trading him, but realistically, I think you're holding off till the offseason to try and deal Anderson. And then beyond that, there's not a lot of pieces. Yasmani Grandal is a free agent. Does anybody want Yasmani Grandal? Maybe somebody that's really catcher needy takes a chance on him for one lower level prospect. Sure, it's fine. But ultimately, this deadline is going to be defined by the starting pitching for the White Sox. It's going to come down to what they're able to get for Giolito and Lynn, potentially Clevenger if he's back and healthy, and then what you can, if you trade Cease or not, and how you really retool this roster, because guys like Luis Robert have been amazing, and Jake Berger's been good, and Andrew Vaughn has been a little lackluster, but has still shown some progression, and I think he'll continue to get better. So it's figuring out how to reset the timeline on this team and adjust it for now to be better set up to compete 24, 25, hopefully.
And those are 2 years where you could have Cease competing with them, or those are years where he can extend that window, which is, I think, the dilemma they got right now. Let's get through our last two teams here. The St. Louis Cardinals, they're the ones that openly said they're going to trade. They're going to trade guys. They don't know if it's big name guys or just guys who are getting close to free agency. And I think that's where they likely move. I don't foresee them actually trading Nolan Arenado or Paul Goldschmidt. Be crazy if they did. They get a haul, but they also said with eyes towards winning in 2024, and those are the best two pieces you have to win in 2024. They have three pitchers that are rentals that all should be moved. Jordan Montgomery having a great year, great last 2 years in St. Louis after getting there to the deadline last year. You have Jack Flaherty, who's having his most healthy season since 2019, and he's been pretty good lately, 3.54 ERA of his last 7 starts. And then you have Jordan Hicks, and say what you want about the more proven relievers at this deadline. I don't think there's a team in baseball that's contending. It isn't going to be enamored by putting 102 miles per hour the back end of their bullpen with Jordan Hicks. So with those three pieces, I think the Cardinals can bring a good return back. And I think those are the three pieces that we definitely see them move.
Yeah, I think there's no reason not to bring those guys to move those guys. And I think, like you said, I don't think the Cardinals are rebuilding at all. I think it's a retool. I think they understand the reality of their division and that their division is going to remain winnable. Even with the Reds on the upswing, their division is going to remain one that they can win. And they know that. Even as bad as this year has been, they have a core of players that can still legitimately contend next year. It's not going to be this year. It's over for them this year. I mean, you never know, right? Baseball's crazy, but they're not looking to compete this year. Like you said, they're going to sell. I think those three pitchers, you got to move. You got to get what you can get for those guys. I think you're, like you said, you're going to get a decent package for those pitchers. And then on the offensive side, you got to start looking at some of these, this log jam of young, versatile hitters, outfielders, especially that are good, but like they need some long-term pitching. They do not have long-term starting pitching that they can rely on right now. So especially if you're moving two of your key rotation pieces that have actually, I mean, have they been the best two rotation pieces? Probably Montgomery and Flaherty have been their best two starters this year. So if you're looking to move at least one, probably both of your best two starters, you got to try and get some long-term pitching in there. So I see, either Dylan Carlson or Tyler O'Neill. I don't think they trade both, but I would almost expect them to trade one of those two. And I think it's a move where they're both young players. It's not like you're trading an aging veteran, but you're trading one of those two for young, talented pitching. I think that's what I'm doing in that situation, just because they have a lot of outfielders. You could maybe consider Lars Newbar, who probably has higher value than both those guys right now. But they have a lot of young hitters and they need some pitching. They need some long-term pitching they can actually rely on. So I think one of those two guys, I think Paul DeJong is another guy that I would think would get at least considered being moved. I mean, he's been pretty good this year for what he is, and you could get a prospect for him at the deadline for a veteran like himself. So, it is like the White Sox. Similarly, it's going to be defined by what they do with those arms and how much they're able to maximize the return on some of those good pitchers.
Yeah, I agree. And those are the four names that I had listed here. Tyler O'Neill, Paul DeJong. Well, actually, I had Tommy Edman too. 2 years of control. Coming off his career last year, he's come back down to earth. I could see them moving him and probably getting more for him than any of those other position players because of that versatility with it. He can literally play any position on the diamond. So there's a lot of contenders that would like that. I do wonder, in a market where there's not a lot of bats, if people view Tyler O'Neill as a change of scenery guy, where they maybe get more than you would expect. I feel like a lot of people believe that you trade O'Neill because there was that dispute with management earlier in the year where him and Mormal weren't on the same page, and maybe that's just not a good fit for him anymore. But the performance has been to a point where it's like, how much do you get back? If maybe there's a team that just look at the guy and the athlete that he is and say, you know what, we'll take a flyer on him. So I don't know. It's interesting. It's interesting. If they wanted to get crazy and really reset, they would trade one of those big guys, or who knows, maybe you try to make a Luis Ariz, Pablo Lopez type trade. Problem with that is I think that's a trade you make in the offseason. Like, I don't know if they trade, Donovan or Gorman now. I think maybe that's something you reassess and say, look, we want a top flight starter, but I just don't see them doing that midseason. So
I don't think so.
We'll see what they do. Last team, Cubs. I think they're a clear seller. They got, like a lot of these teams, they got some pitching to deal. Marcus Stroman, the main piece. I saw the Blue Jays are seriously interested. That's interesting. Return to Toronto for Stroh. I like that. Kyle Hendricks suddenly is affordable. It's the last year of his deal. He's got a club option that any team can get out of. He's pitched pretty well. Drew Smiley's on a really good contract considering how he's pitched this year. Any of those starters can move. Michael Fulmer will be a free agent after this year. He can move. Biggest thing I'm interested in is Cody Bellinger. What can they get back for Bellinger? And the other guy I have listed here is Yan Gomes because he's actually having a good season. A lot of teams need catching. So those are the pieces that I see them moving. But I think the two that will really make or break this deadline for them when it comes to return, it's getting a lot for Stroman and Bellinger, both being rentals essentially. Stroman's got the player option.
It seems like there's been a little bit of hesitancy for the Cubs to sell just because of the fact that the division is bad and they've still remained kind of in it, but they should, like you said. I mean, there's really no reason they shouldn't. I have a lot of friends that are Cubs fans, and some of them are like, oh, we don't want to lose Stroman and Bellinger and whatever, and we could just, try and win the division and re-sign them, but you're not going to re-sign them probably. I mean, at least, Bellinger's going to get a bigger deal, obviously, after this year. This was a prove-it deal for him, and he's proved he's still a good hitter, and he's turned around, his career from a few rough seasons in LA. And then a guy like Stroman, who's getting up there. I mean, I think people don't realize Stroman's older than people may think. He's into his 30s, and he's a good pitcher. But I think this might be kind of the peak we see from Stroman. I'm not sure he's going to remain quite this level for the next few years. So I think, like you said, those are the two guys you really have to look at moving, and those are big guys. I mean, like the White Sox with Giolito, Stroman is kind of that similar. Stroman's probably a step above that, even where he is a rental probably most likely he has an option, so he is a rental essentially. But he's been a little better than Gio even, so that's a guy you could be the top rental pitcher on the market if the Padres don't sell Snell. So that's a great guy to look at. And then Bellinger, every team needs a power bat going into the playoffs, and Bellinger's been great there. But if he's gonna be a free agent, and if you don't have plans to seriously allocate some money for him, then you gotta, like you said, you gotta consider trading him. So I think the Cubs are building a good foundation of this roster right now, and they've taken a step in the right direction generally this year. But I think you have to maximize your return on those two guys, especially, and really prepare for next year.
Yeah, I agree. I think Stroman, if you really feel confident that you can extend him, I guess I wouldn't be shocked if they held on to him, but seems like he's going to hit free agency. And I do think that Stroman's a guy that, uh, because he's not a guy that relies on velocity, it's all movement.
Yeah.
The way he's pitched in Chicago, I think he probably has a good 3 more years left in him. But
Yeah.
if you can because again, of all these pitchers we're talking about, if I had to pick one to slot into the top 3 of my playoff rotation, outside of a Cease, a Scherzer,
Sure.
I
The
might put
rental guys.
Stroman.
Yeah.
I might put him right atop the list. So they might be able to get more than you typically could for a rental
Yeah.
starter with Stroman. So it's probably the best thing for this franchise. The bottom line, though, as we kind of wrap it up here, this is a seller's market, but one that is nearly impossible to predict. We're going to have trade deadline guides for every team. We already have about a third of the league out. So make sure you're checking those out, justbaseball.com. We will have all 30 out before the deadline, so you can read through whatever teams could potentially be selling, buying, somewhere in the middle. And we'll be doing some individual trade stuff too. So a lot of great written content coming your way at justbaseball.com. Make sure you also follow, rate, and review this show, as we'll be locked out of the deadline the last 2 weeks as well.